There are three stories, actually, that we have to choose from to make sense of our lives now. The first story is business as usual. But there's another story. Look under the rug of the business as usual and see what it's costing us. There's another narrative, and that is that a revolution is taking place, a transition.
So let's first look at the argument that no, there isn't any alternative narrative. There isn't a solutions-focused world. There is no solutions revolution going on.
The conflict between Israel and Iran is at a very scary place.
So the situation that the world finds itself in right now is that Israel is saying that Iran is a threat.
Over the last month, Israeli airstrikes inside Syria have killed around 20 Iranian soldiers. Iranian retaliation in some shape or form was inevitable. How all this might start was predictable enough. How it's going to finish is the thing nobody's quite sure about.
The war on terror started in 2001 when two planes flew into and brought down the Twin Towers.
Good Lord.
A third tower also fell on that day, World Trade Tower 7.
This is uncanny. There's 40,000 tons of structural steel designed to resist this collapse.
The fires at the top of the building got so hot that they melted the infrastructure and brought each floor down onto the next one. Architects and engineers say that that's impossible.
Almost every architect and engineer we show this information to agrees with us that these are controlled demolitions.
Next, the US-led coalition is looking for bin Laden in the caves of Tora Bora.
I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of a side of a mountain.
Oh no.
This is it. This is a fortress. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
They didn't find any secret lair, but they were able to build a new pipeline through Afghanistan. Next, the US-led coalition invade Iraq.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
He didn't.
The Iraq War did enable the US-led coalition to take control of the oil. Then the US-led coalition started bombing Assad because of his use of chemical weapons.
According to Defense Secretary James Mattis, there is no evidence that the Syrian government has used sarin gas on its own people.
We're looking for the actual evidence.
According to the Armed Forces Journal, we can't understand the war in Syria without looking at natural gas and pipeline politics. Why are oil and gas so important? In 2006, Al Gore's documentary, The Inconvenient Truth, brought climate change and global warming into every household and to every person around the world. Studies show that we are now creating a shift in Earth's biosphere. We're reaching a point of mass extinction, the 6th mass extinction on planet Earth. And this mass extinction could include the human race. Bill Mckibben, founder of 350.org, wrote the first book on climate change called The End of Nature. Mckibben looked at scientific research and came up with a simple equation which shows that if we continue to use the oil that we already have in reserves, then we're going to go 5 times over the safe limit for climate change. So why are we continuing on this suicidal path?
You have elected officials who are shills for the oil companies or the fossil fuel industry, and there's a lot of money involved.
A 2014 study by Princeton and Northwestern universities has found that the USA is now an oligarchy, and that means that it's now ruled by a small group of elites and interest groups. The next big global event was the 2008 financial crisis.
Greed and irresponsibility on Wall Street and in Washington has led us to a financial crisis as serious as any that we faced since the Great Depression.
IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has been warning that the next financial crisis is coming since 2015. And the International Bank of Settlements, which is a private banking institution in charge of 60 other private banks that provide money to their countries around the world, has said that the central banks are running out of options. In 2018, we are now still reminded in the mainstream news that this financial crisis is imminent. And yet the USA with its allies, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Turkey, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Israel, continue with war in the Middle East. So what do the facts say about the US-led coalition? The UN has reported that Saudi Arabia is causing a humanitarian crisis in Yemen.
It says, and this is the report, that it has documented that coalition forces have conducted airstrikes targeting civilians and civilian objects in violation of international humanitarian law, including camps for internally displaced persons and refugees, civilian residential areas, medical facilities, schools and mosques.
Saudi Arabia right now has been found to be implicitly involved in 9/11. Russia provided evidence that Turkey is buying oil from ISIS. And Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest financial corporations in the world, has bought a 30% share in Turkey's oil. The Qatari government has been accused of working with a British security firm to help fund rebels to use chemical weapons. The USA paid a British PR firm $500 million to create fake news about Iraq. And in 2012, the US created ISIS by training rebels in Iraq to go into Syria.
We started a war to overthrow a regime. It was covert. It was Timber Sycamore. People can look it up, the CIA operation, together with Saudi Arabia. Still it's shrouded in secrecy, which is part of the problem in our country. A major war effort shrouded in secrecy, never debated by Congress, never explained to the American people, signed by President Obama, never explained.
A recent report has found the Pentagon is spending $2.2 billion providing arms to the rebels in Syria. And then we have the next big global event.
2013, with yet more details exposed. From The Guardian on Wednesday night, it's Verizon. The Wall Street Journal today says it's also AT&T and Sprint and unnamed internet service providers and credit card companies. Then from The Guardian and The Washington Post, we get details of the PRISM program, sweeping up vast amounts of internet everything. Your emails, your videos, your photos, your chats. From most of the big famous internet companies, Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, Facebook, AOL, Skype, YouTube, Apple.
Which is when we found out that Five Eyes, the USA, UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand are literally collecting all of our data, everything online about us. Germany is the only country in the US-led coalition fighting the internet collection of data, and at the highest levels of German government. And the German media are the only media to report what Russia is saying, which is that the US and UK intelligence services are creating fake news that is encouraging the war on terror in Syria and the Middle East.
Was ist Propaganda? Und was ist glaubhaft? Ein inszeniertes Schauspiel, Fake News.
Is Germany now siding with Russia, or does Germany know better than anyone the direction that this is headed? Former General Wesley Clark says that this war was planned and that Iran has always been the end goal.
This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
And in fact, if you look at the US military bases, they surround Iran.
Our bases are there to solve a problem.
And the USA has said for a long time that if Israel invade Iran, then the US will support them. So what's going on?
A 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us.
Exactly 1 year before 9/11, Project for a New American Century, a think tank for the Bush administration, said that at the moment there is no global rival to compete with the USA, and what they need to do is keep expanding their influence around the world. And a study by the Baker Institute, published by the Council on Foreign Relations in 2001, warned of an impending global energy crisis if the USA cannot maintain energy security. And research on energy security by the Council on Foreign Relations, published in 2010, shows that the USA still sees energy security as maintaining control of fossil fuels, oil and gas. The report states that oil is still the main concern of the USA, but natural gas is not so much of a concern because of new technologies which now allow for fracking or shale gas, even though scientists say that if we continue fracking, particularly in the Alberta tar sands in Canada, which is larger than England and Wales, it will be game over for climate change. In fact, the US military uses more oil than any other institution in the world. The only thing which is keeping this economic system going right now, and keeping USA as the superpower, is the use of the dollar, the petrodollar, to trade in oil. And also the continual military expansion of the USA. So does that mean that Russia, Iran, Iraq and Syria are all innocent? No. Iraq, back in 2000, 1 year before 9/11, decided to stop using the US dollar to trade. The year of the financial crisis, Iran stopped oil transactions in US dollars. In 2011, Iraq, Iran and Syria signed a $10 billion gas pipeline deal. In 2014, Iran and Russia started negotiating private oil deals. And that same year, Russia and China signed a $400 billion gas deal. These countries know that the US is relying on oil to keep the economy afloat. So they're negotiating deals which exclude the petrodollar and are putting the US economy at risk of total collapse. The only solution, it seems at this point, would be for the countries to get together and to say, you know what, the economic system has collapsed. Using oil and expanding military activities around the world is suicidal. And what we need to do is get together, bring in experts, and look for an alternative to the current economic system. We need to do things differently. But what's happening? Schools tell us that we should keep learning for jobs. The news tells us that this is just the way that it is. Adverts tell us that if you don't really like what's going on around you, then go and buy something and that will cheer you up and make you happy. And the general public are staring into screens like rabbits staring at headlights as the catastrophe comes towards them. And that is the mainstream narrative.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat, an alien threat from outside this world.
It seems that the only other way that all of these countries now could not clash would be, as Ronald Reagan said, if there was some big global threat, some alien invasion from out of space that would bring everybody together for a common aim and a common goal.
The Pentagon now confirms the existence of a secretive UFO program. The Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program was created in 2007.
It's rotating. These newly released videos from the Department of Defense, the Pentagon officially acknowledging its Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program for the first time.
The problem with that is whether it's continued war on planet Earth or in space, neither of those are going to solve the problem of global warming and climate change. As Russell Brand said,
if you leave it to them, we're all fucked.
That's some true news. So now let's look at what the mainstream narrative is not telling us. Now let's look at the other side of the argument. Let's look at the yes argument. Let's look at the facts that show that there is an alternative. There is a solutions-focused world. And there is a solutions revolution going on right now. Are you ready? Subscribe here.
Nose is a tool that is abused to fool you and to leave you scared and confused. Truths is like the nose. If the nose was true, I want some truths. Let's have some truths.
Israel launched those particular strikes 1 hour after Donald Trump withdrew from the deal with Iran.
And this is why Israel thanks President Trump for his courageous leadership and his commitment to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. Not today, not in a decade, not ever.